This is the seventh of a series of videos dealing with the topic of problems with Old Testament Messianic prophecies. Now, this particular problem is really an accusation that's leveled against the New Testament writers. And it goes something like this. The New Testament writers they may have intentionally shaped their stories so that they mirrored Old Testament prophecies. So you have to let that sink in. They're saying that the New Testament writers intentionally shaped their stories so that it would look like Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecy. Now, this is a very clever argument, and we have to acknowledge that this is at least an intellectual argument, a possibility. It is a possibility that that happened. And this is one of the things that I like to do when I'm discussing these things with other people. And when somebody comes at me with a view like this, I would never just say, well, you're wrong, because we can't prove that. That is a possibility. I would acknowledge that and say, okay, that's a possibility. But I don't think that it's likely to be true for two reasons. First of all, when we read the New Testament, we read it carefully. We see that the New Testament writers portray themselves as very self-centered individuals. Think about James and John and their request to Jesus. Remember, they came to Jesus privately and they said, Jesus, whenever you come into your power, let one of us sit at your right hand and one of us at your left hand when you are in your glory. In other words, we want to be glorified with you. And they did it privately because they didn't want the other disciples to know about this. And then Jesus gently castigated them and told them that the kingdom of God operates on a plane unfamiliar to man. Things aren't done there the same way that things are done here on earth. And of course, when the other disciples found out about this, they were indignant. But this story portrays them in a very negative light. Think about Peter and his disowning Jesus 3 times. These stories could have easily been swept under the rug. Nobody ever had to know about these things. So it's very unlikely, in my view, that the New Testament writers would have portrayed themselves as such selfish individuals if they were trying to simply invent stories to make Jesus appear that he was the Messiah. They seem to really believe this, is what I'm getting at here. They seem to really believe that Jesus had risen from the dead. Think about Paul when he says, I am the chief of all sinners, the worst of sinners. He's talking about himself. He's abasing himself. Would such individuals who talked about themselves in such a lowly manner, would they really invent stories just to make it look like Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecy? I don't think so. Usually when people have a hidden agenda, they're doing it to aggrandize themselves, to make themselves bigger, to make themselves look better. And these disciples did the exact opposite of that. But the second argument is the clincher for me. And that is that the New Testament writers, according to church tradition, they went to their deaths claiming that they had seen Jesus alive after his death. So, would these individuals have not only went to their deaths, but also suffered so much to propagate something that they knew was a lie. Peter, according to church tradition, was crucified upside down at his own request because he didn't feel he was worthy to die in the same manner as his Lord. According to church tradition, the Apostle Paul was beheaded. Again, would they have invented stories to make Jesus look like he fulfilled Old Testament prophecy and then die for something that they knew was a lie? I think that is very unlikely.